Conference, please give a warm welcome to Sheila Coleman from Justice for the 96.
Thank you very much for inviting me. And it's quite poignant because I remember coming to, it was an FBU conference here many years ago now with Anne Williams, who lost her son Kevin. And in those very dark years when we were trying to get out there, it was unions at conferences that would give us a platform, not just to speak, but also in them days have a whip round for us, which at that time was greatly needed because we couldn't have carried on. We couldn't have produced things like the "Don't Buy the Sun" stickers that John never goes anywhere without. It was. And whilst there's many aspects of it all, in a very short space of time, I'd just like to concentrate on the relevance of campaigns such as the Hillsborough Justice campaign in relation to what's going on and what's, the fantastic turnaround we've seen in Labour Party politics over the last 2 years, in spite of the knives being out by people close to home. Because the Hillsborough Justice campaign serves as a great example of a grassroots campaign. It emerged out of a disquiet and an unease, I'll be brutally honest, with the Hillsborough Family Support Group, because a lot of bereaved families within the Family Support Group felt that things weren't happening the way they wanted them to happen. And there was a huge difference of opinion. One of the fundamental things that some families disagreed with was the fact there was no outlet for survivors of the disaster. Some families, like myself and others, felt that survivors, not only were they our greatest asset because they were the eyewitnesses to what had gone on, but equally they were victims, they were traumatized, they were physically injured, mentally injured, and no one was acknowledging them whatsoever. So the Hillsborough campaign, the Hillsborough Justice campaign, which I belong to, was born out of an amalgamation of bereaved families, survivors, and people who generally supported the fight for justice. I wasn't at Hillsborough. I'm not one of the bereaved. I go to pains to point that out. My initial involvement in it was as an academic researcher, really as someone from Liverpool, and in that sense, I had that fire in my belly about what had gone on, and I was listening to people I knew, and that was a great variance with what I was reading in newspapers. But I was employed to monitor, on a research project, employed to monitor the legal proceedings after Hillsborough. And I won't go into all that, but what I saw firsthand was a systematic cover-up by the state, through the agents of the state, be it the coroner's office, be it South Yorkshire Police, West Midlands Police. And I was laughed at, and other people who believed me were laughed at the time, and we were called mad conspiracy theorists. And I never bought into the notion of conspiracy. So that when in 2012, when the Hillsborough Independent Panel reported, and David Cameron stood up in the House, not only did he apologise, he actually said there was a concerted cover-up and conspiracy. And that kind of really blew my mind a little bit. But equally, at the same time, I knew that the acknowledgement of those things showed how far down the road, the corrupt road we'd gone down, when governments could admit to conspiracy, cover-up and lies, and they wouldn't fall and no one would resign. Because I'm old enough to go back in time to when governments fell, when politicians, individual politicians had lied. You know, I might have only been a child, but I remember the Profumo scandal. And if you go back that far, you see the changing nature of politics. And I always go to pains to point out that Labour were in power far more, for a greater length of time, than the Tories ever were. And rather than do anything, they compounded the cover-up through the Stuart Smith inquiry, Jack Straw in particular, as Home Secretary. And I was in the House of Commons in 1993, if I'm not mistaken. No, it was after that, 1996, when Jack Straw brought us all into room 13 and said to us after the Stuart Smith inquiry, before he reported in the House, well, you told us the police lied. We listened to you, we agreed. Look, we've even put it in this report, but wouldn't have made any difference. So what you found there was a further systematic cover-up and the Labour government further entrenching the lies of Hillsborough and doing absolutely nothing. So I'm very cynical about party politics when it comes to Hillsborough, because I stand here saying through, gritted teeth that the Tories gave us more than Labour ever did. I'm ashamed to have to say that, but that's the reality, even though they did it for their own expedient reasons also. So Labour, when it initiated the Hillsborough Independent Panel to inquire, Labour were in the death throes and they knew that they were passing it on, likelihood, to a Tory government. Some call it a coalition, I'd call it a Tory government. In any case, it meant that we had to deal with people who, I'll be honest, I normally wouldn't want to sit down with. I've sat down with David Cameron. I have sat down on numerous occasions with Theresa May. And that's the compromise you make when you're involved in a campaign. Sometimes you have to go for, see the bigger picture, know this is important. I say that because whilst a lot of people around Hillsborough would sing Theresa May's praises around how she dealt with all Hillsborough stuff, I would say it was expedient. It was expedient because of her policy in relation to the police and her policy in relation to the Independent Police Complaints Commission. My view on the IPCC is they're not fit for purpose, but nevertheless, that's all we've got to deal with. So you find yourself working within a framework that you wouldn't normally and ideally want to work with. But nevertheless, a grassroots campaign made up of a minority of families, grassroots football supporters and survivors, and people who supported the fight for justice, took the Hillsborough issue, and it was going nowhere, to the point where people had to listen. Because I stand here today and I tell you, it was the lads and women going the match with these stickers, with Hillsborough Justice Campaign stickers, with badges, with banners, who got the message out there and who took the campaign out of the parameters of football for it to be seen within the realms of a major miscarriage of justice. And that is what happened. And once we got out there, we increasingly got asked to speak at miscarriage of justice, social justice issues, and we forged links with groups. We took it out there. We weren't afraid to shy away from the politics of Hillsborough, because anyone who said the Hillsborough wasn't political was just living in cloud cuckoo land. We took it out there. We took it to the point where we couldn't be ignored. And when Andy Burnham came to Anfield at the 20th anniversary, I know people lay claim, he lays claim to, a lot of things, and other people say he was our saviour. No, he wasn't. He stood there, watched the YouTube. He stood there, was smart enough to stand back and say nothing when people started that one person shouting justice for the 96, which then built into a crescendo of shouting justice for the 96. And I do believe it was a pivotal point, but not for the reasons going down in history now. I think it was pivotal because they said, these aren't going away. These people are not going away. We're going to have to give them something. And following on from the Hillsborough Independent Panel report, we then got the inquest verdicts into accidental death being quashed, and the new inquest, which only last year delivered an unlawful killing verdict. To get to that stage was monumental. But I can tell you, when you've been in a campaign for so many years, you actually just go, it's just another day. It really is a bizarre feeling because you've been involved in so many letdowns. You've had the door shut in your face so many times that when something goes your way, you really don't know what to say. I came out of that court in Warrington and people, like media people who knew me, stuck a microphone in front of me and said, Sheila, what do you think? And I went, I can't breathe. And I tell you, I've never had that. I could not breathe. And I was so unused to coming out. I had all negative speeches worked out. Do them off the top of my head. Come out and say something because you've got a victory. It was so unusual, and I fumbled and I flustered when I got my breath back, because this was a game changer. But this was 27 years too late. Let's be honest about that, because along the way I'd seen so many people die. And in this brief time that I've got to talk, all I would say is, in the time following on from the unlawful killing verdict, I've spoken at many things, and what I've spoken about mainly is what I call controlling the narrative, because Hillsborough is now a commodity. I'm not cynical, I'm very realistic about it. You know, I named it Brand Hillsborough, because you put Hillsborough on something, it sells, whether that's a t-shirt, a record, anything. And people are out there, make no mistake about it, making money, gaining status on the back of Hillsborough, celebrity status, Brand Hillsborough. And there are people trying to control the narrative who played very little part, who came in. I always say they came in once the main body of us had got over Beecher's Brook, to use that analogy. People, grassroots people, had done the legwork, they'd done all the work, having doors shut in their faces, going around trying to get to places with no funds whatsoever. And people had paid the price. Families had died. Anne Williams died. John Glover died. People who fought died. And the people who are forgotten and remain the forgotten victims of Hillsborough are the survivors. There are probably people here today who are survivors of Hillsborough. They are the forgotten victims in the scheme of things. For too many years, they deferred to the families. Because yes, families did lose someone, and it was justice for the 96. But I can tell you, I have lost count of the number of people we have helped with psychiatric treatment for extreme post-traumatic stress, the number of people who have committed suicide because they couldn't live with the guilt imposed upon them, not just by the Sun newspaper and the headline, but other newspapers, some of them a lot nearer to home. Only a couple of weeks ago, John asked me would I speak at this conference. He asked me whilst we were both attending the funeral of a survivor, 46 years of age. Not good enough the lives people have led. And I spoke at that funeral, and I made a promise that I will never go quietly and let survivors be forgotten whilst people continue to ask me to speak. Because without the tenacity of survivors, many of whom are so damaged psychologically. Only yesterday I was dealing with something, the wife of someone who messaged me because the husband is only speaking about it for the first time. Young people have got married and not told their wives anything about Hillsborough. Something will happen, it'll spark, whatever. But we've lost a lot of people as well. And I said I'd put this into some sort of framework. This was a grassroots issue and a grassroots campaign. We never lost sight of that. We never aligned to anyone politically. No one wanted us, let's face it. No party wanted to know Hillsborough. There were really dark years where we were out in the wilderness, but week after week, we met in a little room in Anfield where families went over old stories, we went over old ground, but we tried to retain hope, and we looked to the longevity of other struggles to give us hope. And it worked without doubt. I think that what we did, and I only know this because it comes back to us now, was quite inspirational in giving people hope in other campaigns. I think now, what I've seen, don't get me, I was not aligned to any political party. I tried to get in the Labour Party 2 years ago. They wouldn't have me. I subsequently got in last year, the second time Corbyn was, up to be re-elected. For me to commit, because I'm an outsider by nature, for me to commit said, I'll have a piece of this. I like what this is doing, getting people on board, getting young people on board, because it was giving me hope, because what politics had lost was its humanity. I'd been around families. I'd seen how politicians treated families. I saw firsthand the cruel way bereaved families were treated all those years ago in Sheffield at the inquest by the police and by the coroner's people. a total disregard, and their grief and their vulnerability was exploited. We needed to inject hope and humanity back into politics. I've seen that happen. I'm actually knackered at the moment because I was out last week in Wirral West, Chester, the marginals, thinking, where can we go where we can try and have a go? And I like a challenge. And, you know, my little Fitbit worked overtime. I thought it was going to explode at one point because I was out knocking on doors because I believed in something, because I do believe a change is afoot. And I'm making this political now because in the latter days, we came in from the cold, the Hillsborough Justice campaign, and it was unions like your own, like the FBU, like PCS, who brought us on board, who supported us, and who believed in what we were doing, who gave us a voice, who invited us to conferences, who took our T-shirts and sold them, who gave us hope. And we have to work on that now. I really do believe we have to work on that now. And you know, from the Hillsborough Justice campaign, I wished Jeremy Corbyn had been in this position when we were fighting years ago, because as a campaign, we'd have been happy to say, we want a piece of this, please help us. It came too late for us as a campaign. We still haven't got justice. The DPP will rule probably the end of this month, the beginning of July, as to whether there will be any prosecutions. My take, I'm optimistic there might be some prosecutions. It'll be drawn out to the point where the people who are being prosecuted will die or will go away. When the establishment are caught out, as they were over Hillsborough, they very quickly reorganised to protect their own. Let's make no mistake about it. That's what's going to happen. That's what's happening with controlling the narrative. There's a mainstream of people who look like they're on the left a bit, who write things. One day I'll take time out to actually write the real story. But when you're campaigning, you've got to focus. You can't do everything. My hope is that we are heading for a better future. I sincerely hope, don't take this the wrong way, that Theresa May does form a government and that the government manages for a few months, because I think we've got to take this down the road of chaos a bit further with the DUP on board before more people go, no, we can't have this. Maybe that's my naive politics, but I want it to get worse, because then I think we're just going to take over. And I just hope that time means when we have a Labour government under Jeremy Corbyn, that what happened to Hillsborough families, what continues to happen to survivors, will never happen to any individuals involved in any man-made disaster ever again, that no families will be put through a trauma of 27 years and counting to get justice for people who went to a football match, were killed and were vilified and somehow were said to have contributed to their own deaths. So thank you very much. I could say so much more. I've got a few Don't Buy the Sun stickers here. They continue to tell the lies, but I really appreciate being given the platform, and thanks very much. And thanks to John for all he's done over the years. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sheila.